Welcome back, everybody, to the Online Course Creators Summit. And today our guest expert is talking about something that will allow your students to be more successful in the course, increase the chances that they'll complete, and it will also help you identify areas where the students may need to record some information. We're talking about using workbooks with online courses. And my guest expert today is Jessica Freeman. She's an award-winning graphic and web designer helping service-based entrepreneurs create a brand that shines through every level of their business. Outside of designing, she also loves producing for her YouTube channel and podcast. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia with her husband, Aaron. So welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to hand it over to you because I know you've got some great stuff to share.
Hey, thank you so much. So as Laura said, I'm Jess, and I run Jess Creatives, and I work with entrepreneurs to help them with their design, and that often includes, working with them on their courses and launching their courses. So today, I want to help you DIY your own workbook, and this really is going to help you simplify that process because you have a lot going on when you're launching a course. There are lots of moving pieces, and you're designing lots of things. So I really want to help you make the most of your workbook and, just simplify that process for you. So the first thing, when you are creating workbook, you actually have several options depending on your budget and how tech savvy you are. So the first option you have is Pages or Word. Now, this is probably my least favorite option because it's not that design friendly. Most people have these programs, and that's why some use it. But if it were me, this would be my last option. Then you have InDesign and Illustrator, and this is what a lot of professionals use. This is what I use to create workbooks for my clients. It is the most pricey, but it has the most functionality. So depending on what you do in your business, it might be worth the investment, or it might just be better to use a free or cheaper option. So another option is Google Slides. If you have a Google account, then you can use this with Google Apps. This is really has a lot of functionality, but again, not one of my favorite options. And then probably the most popular option is Canva. This is what a lot of DIY people use. There's templates. You can also find a lot of tutorials or mini courses on how to use Canva. So if you're not familiar with it, definitely check it out. It's really, really easy to design with. And then no matter what you use, I want to point out PDF Escape. This is a web-based service that will actually allow you to make your PDF interactive so that your students can actually type in their answers instead of, printing it out if they don't want to, or even if they just want to do both. But I'm pretty sure it's free, or at least free to a certain extent. So that's a nice little bonus that you can add into your workbooks. So before you start making your workbook, you want your workbook to serve a purpose. You want this workbook to be helpful. You don't be afraid to include some extra tips, even pull snippets from your course. So if you just want to reiterate some really helpful information, whatever you can do to really make your workbook helpful, and you're not just handing people a worksheet with 5 blanks and saying, oh, here's your worksheet to help with the course. This could really just be an added bonus and help your students really follow through with the course. And, people learn in different styles. So having a workbook where they can write things down might also help them digest the information even more. So you can do this by having fill in the blanks. This could be, when they're watching a video module, you could have fill in the blanks that it's, whatever you're saying, then they fill in the blanks, just again, to help them follow along and digest this information more. You can also have checklists. Courses often have a ton of information and it can be overwhelming. So having a checklist will help break that down into easier bites to digest. It can also help them go through the process easier. Again, you can have to-dos. This is similar to checklist. like I mentioned earlier, you could do this within a module. So like if you're in module 2 in the workbook, you could have a to-do item, do XYZ before module 3 so that, everything's happening in the right order and that you are doing this the right way. And then even a timeline can help. If you have a course that is time restrictive, like you're doing something in 6 months, then having a timeline saying, okay, in month 1, you need to do X, Y, Z. In month 2, complete these tasks. That will be helpful for the students as well. But also if your course, if you were a wedding planner and you're creating a course for other wedding planners or maybe even brides, include timelines as an example. So a wedding planner could have a timeline for someone who wants to plan their wedding in a year. So those kind of things, again, just helpful examples can really help those students and really prepare them for success. And then also charts. So this could be charts that they fill in the blank, like maybe they're talking about different pieces of the pie in their business, or even charts that they fill out to track their progress through the course. You could also have compare and contrast charts. So you could have one that they fill out now to mark how many social media followers they have. And then, they have a second chart that they are supposed to fill out in 6 months or year, because that incentivizes them to go through the course so that they can compare the charts and see the results as they work through the course. So now we want to get into designing. And first we're going to talk about fonts, because that's the most fun part. So to really simplify things, you want to use 2 to 3 fonts. And you want to do this for 2 reasons. 2 to 3 fonts will help your workbook look more cohesive and more professional. But it also makes the designing easier on you. Because if you're going through and you have, a 60-page workbook and you're trying to choose fonts every single page, it's going to take you forever. Because you're going to be like, well, I want to use this font. Well, now how do I pair? What font do I choose for this new font? There's so many combinations, and then the design will look like it's all over the place. If you have 2 to 3 fonts, it's going to be really cohesive. And then, with each new page in your workbook, oh, well, my headers are this font and my body copy is this font. And then you just choose it, apply the formatting, and you move on to the next page. So when you're choosing fonts, I recommend using what's going to best fit your brand. Now, this can either be the exact fonts that you use in your brand, or it can just be something that fits the style of your brand. For example, the fonts that you see on the screen right now, these are not my brand fonts, but they fit the style of my brand. So just choosing whatever so it has a cohesive feel with your overall brand will really just help your course have that really professional, polished look. So if you are like, I don't even know how to choose fonts. I have a few no-fail font combinations right here. So Open Sans and Merriweather, Lato and Droid Serif, and then Lead Gothic and Arvo. A little tip to help you if you don't like those combinations, you'll notice if you pull those up, those are all serif fonts paired with a sans serif font. So you always want to combine serif and sans serif. Never use 2 different serif or sans serif fonts together. And then you want to use different text sizes in your workbook. Even though this is a much larger scale, think about textbooks like when you were in college. Think about, like if you opened your science textbook, there were big, huge page titles, subtitles, section titles, and then, of course, the actual content. Okay, now imagine if that textbook was all the same font size. It was all 12-point fonts. That would be awful to try and navigate and try to read and digest the information. So you want to use these different text sizes to help create hierarchy and to guide the people, because it'll make it easier to, again, break down the content into sizable chunks, because they'll see like, oh, I just need to answer these 3 questions, and then the next section starts on this, the next page. Their brain kind of processes that as like, oh, this is more digestible, then I'll move on to the next section. And that's just with the help of a font size. That's all you have to do. So again, just break it into sections, and you want to be consistent with your font sizes. So here's an example of the sizing that I would maybe use in a workbook. So you have your page header that's larger and usually a bolder font. Then you'll have your subtitle that's a little bit smaller, and then your body copy. And body copy, I usually recommend no smaller than 12 point. The subtitle and page header can really vary. There's not really a standard size for those. But body copy, no smaller than 12 point, just so it's readable. Often people will use size 14 if they want to kind of fill up the page more. So whatever you kind of feel is a good contrast between the body copy and the other subtitle and page headers. But just wanted to note, also, if you have your page header as, 30 points or 30, size 30, you need to use that same formatting across every page header. You really want to be consistent. So don't have a page header size 30 on page 1 and size 45 on the last page. You want to be consistent. And again, this is just going to help you when you're designing, because you know already, okay, these are my fonts that I have that I'm using in my document. And instead of thinking like, oh, what size do I need to make it on this page? You always know, okay, my page header is always this font at this size. And that just simplifies the design process for you. So now we're going to talk about colors. So you really want to use 2 to 4 colors, just like with the fonts. This is going to help it have a very cohesive feel. And again, just simplify the process for you. So I would create a color palette to help you kind of help that guide your design. And that way you're not having a rainbow across your workbook. And if you're like, well, I don't know how to choose a color scheme. Well, I recommend having a dark color, a light color, a bold color, like an accent color, and then either a soft or neutral color. So you can see here we have the orange as our bold accent. Our yellow is the lighter color. This purple/blue color is the dark. And we have that green for the natural kind of soft color. But you also want to make sure that when you are combining colors, whether that's color boxes on top of each other, or most often, colored fonts on top of color boxes, that it's high contrast. So I have some examples here of good combinations and bad combinations. Even though you're like, I want to use all of these colors in my workbook and I don't want to use, black and white. Often the black and white can be the best to use on top of color. So you can see at the very bottom, white is the best color to use on top of this orange and purple. And that just makes it easier for your students to read. So you can use colors in other ways, just making sure that if you're using fonts with a color, that it's really easy to use. Now, if you were using the purple or the orange font on white, that would be fine. But again, just not on top of each other. This is the biggest mistake that I see people making, is using the wrong colors on top of each other. And it just makes people not want to read your content. So there are often, little details that can really improve your workbook. So I want to touch quickly on these. So number your pages, because this can help people, especially if they're printing it out. Then if you have a large workbook, especially like 75 pages or something, then it's going to be forever. It's going to take them forever to try and flip through and find like, okay, I was in module 5, but I don't know where that is. So, make sure you number your pages just to help your students out. You can actually reference modules throughout your workbook. So it could be as something as small as just saying, make sure you watch module 2 video before you fill out these these questions, or even labeling each page in your workbook with the right module so they know, like, oh, this one goes to module 1, this one goes to module 2. That way they're not trying to fill out this page while they're in the wrong module and they're like, this is not making any sense. Then they'll realize, oh, I'm not in the right place. I've gone too far in the workbook and I haven't watched the right videos yet. And then also make sure you add your name and copyright. And you can do this, either have a copyright page at the beginning or the end of your workbook, or a lot of people will put this at the bottom in the footer of each page. It doesn't have to be large, it doesn't have to be, bold, like bright, but just to protect yourself and your content, make sure to include this in your workbook as well. Overall, just remember to keep it simple. Design is something that people often overcomplicate. They often feel like, I have to keep adding, I need to add more to this workbook, but sometimes the most polished designs are the most simple. So don't feel like you need to keep adding or go to the next level. Just keep it simple. As long as your workbook looks good, has a consistent feel to it, that's what's going to matter the most. So I want to actually kind of walk you through my own process and how I design workbooks for my own clients and for myself. So the first thing, create an InDesign document. I will actually kind of start with 20 pages, sometimes more if I know that they have a lot of content. But I want to start with a big number so I don't have to keep going back and adding more pages and adding more pages. Just kind of interrupts the design flow if I have to keep adding pages every few minutes. So I'll just create an InDesign document. Then I'm going to I've already, at this point in the process, I've already created a brand for the course. So I want to insert the logo and any brand elements. So if I have any like patterns, make sure I have the color palette inside the InDesign document, the logo, of course, anything like that, any of the branding elements, make sure to add those. So I already have them because they're going to be throughout the workbook. And then I'm going to create the cover. And sometimes I do this in Illustrator and import it, and sometimes I do it in InDesign. It kind of depends on the workbook, the design, things like that. My own workbook was just the logo on the front with a little bit of text. So I just did that in InDesign. But what you see on the screen, I actually did in Illustrator and then imported it into InDesign. There's really not a right or wrong way. Just kind of depends on the design. Then at the beginning of the book, I always add a table of contents, like with a little welcome message, like, so excited you're here. Through this workbook, you'll find X, Y, and Z, and then have the table of contents. And this is helpful, again, for people who will print it out. But I also make my workbook accessible for the digital users as well. Like, personally, I'm not one that prints things out. I do everything just on my computer. Well, in InDesign, because, I mentioned earlier, it's very interactive. I have those features easily accessible. In InDesign, I can make my table of contents interactive so people can click Module 2 and it will jump to Module 2 in the workbook. So they don't have to scroll through the PDF and find Module 2. They can click and it will jump right there in the PDF. So that's really handy. And that doesn't affect the look of the design for those who are printing it out. It looks the exact same to them. But again, just that little added bonus. So whether they are printing it or just viewing it online, they can easily access all of your content. So then I will, of course, start adding color and design elements. Now, because I'm always thinking of the students who are going to print out the workbook, I don't use lots of color. Like, I don't use large color backgrounds, full bleed backgrounds, or large images, unless you wanted to create 2 versions of your workbook. But personally, I just do one and then just go easy on the color, because even though I know people can take their workbook and get it printed at Office Depot or whatever, if they're like me I don't even print mine out, but if I did, I wouldn't want to make the trip to Office Depot. So I would want to print it out at home without wasting a lot of ink. So just something to consider. But I will add little pops of color with, sidebars, patterns, as well as just, applying color to the text as needed. So this is just a little kind of snippet preview of something you can do in your workbook to just add some color so it's not all black and white. Then I will also add icons. This is a great way to add little pops of color, some visual interest in your workbook without, having a full bleed background in your workbook. You can use these, next to page headers. You could use little icons. Like if you had a little pop out of information, you could add an icon there next to questions, wherever you feel it fits best. You can find icons for free, or you can find some paid ones. Creative Market is a popular resource for finding icons. There are also icon designers if you want to have a higher price point and get some custom icons, but Creative Market is a popular resource if you want to add those little bits in your workbook. So then I will go in and start adding in little places to add extra info. So in my workbook for my website course, one part was talking about design. And so I listed out font combinations. So even though the font combinations were in the course and people could see them, I wanted them to have easy access in the workbook as well, because this is really helpful, tangible information for my students. Not that the rest of my course content wasn't, but these things are, font combinations I know is something that people think about often. So I wanted them to have it right there, either on their desk or their desktop. So just creating little pop-outs like this example is something else you can do in your workbook. And then I'm going to go ahead and, add in the questions. So you can see here, I have, Module 3, Lesson 2. I have some paragraph text, just a little bit of a recap from the module. And then I have these questions / fill in the blank areas. And this is for them to work through the content for their website. So you can see just how I have it laid out. You can have more or less text. I don't know that I would have much more than what's on the right side of the page, because you don't want this to be a book. You don't want them to have to read even more. This is just little bits of helpful information for them to work through as they go through your course. And then I always have a second pair of eyes go through my workbook. This could be either a professional editor, or I just will even have friends and colleagues go through it. I also like to have sometimes my husband go through it. It's, as entrepreneurs, we are aware of, industry standards and terminology. But if someone is a new entrepreneur and taking your course, if that's who it's targeted to, you don't want to have too much terminology. You want things to be really clear. So having someone who's outside of our industry can sometimes be helpful, because they can be like, wait, what about this step? You talk about X, Y, Z, and then it's just go into this. And sometimes it's it would make sense if you were actually in the course. But sometimes it can be I did not even think about that. I should have told them to go register for their domain right here instead of on the next page. So having someone else review it can be really helpful. And then lastly, I just export as an interactive PDF so that, and that's a special setting in InDesign. There's save as a normal PDF, but you have to export as an interactive PDF to actually have those boxes where people can type in their answers into the workbook. So just to recap, you want to keep it simple. 2 to 3 colors, 2 to 3 fonts. This may seem limiting, but I promise it's going to help you have a really nicely designed workbook. And it's just going to help you, simplify the process of designing so you don't have as many choices. Then just remember, make the workbook as useful as possible with, the charts, the timelines, checklists, and just little bits of information. because you really want this workbook to help guide them through the course, not just here's all the course information regurgitated into a workbook with like a tiny bit of space to write. So hopefully, as you work on your workbook, this just really helps you, this information, just simplify the process, and really just keep the design process as a whole really simple.
That was awesome and so much good practical information. I especially loved the way that you broke down how you're actually making a workbook and the importance
Mm-hmm.
of, it's not just about the content that goes in there, but it's also about the font that you choose and the sizes of different things. And so one of the things I wanted to recap too is for anyone who's creating their course, when you're using these different materials, whether it's pictures or icons, make sure that you're properly licensed to use them.
Yes.
It's never a good idea to
Yes.
go to Google Images and pull whatever you find or take it from someone else's website, because that could be a problem. And of course, as you're going through the course, the relationship between your course and the workbook should always be clear. So you want to reference the workbook through the course, and you can do that within your workbook as well. So I really only have one question for you because
Yes.
you covered so much. So let's say you're a busy course creator, you don't want to do this on your own, or you just don't have time to do it on your own. What is the best way to identify someone to help you with this? Is it to give the designer access to the course or your outline? I mean, do you have a specific recommended method that you would use?
I know some people will give the designer access to the course. Some designers will, pull the information or they'll grab screenshots, and that's just easier. But most designers will want all of the content outlined in a Word document. And it can just say module 1 with the questions, module 2 with the question, or, whatever. I've had some people who say if you see a place that we could, add a checklist or pull some information. And that's again where access to the course can be helpful, because we might see in module 3, you had these steps. I think that would be better or a good addition to the workbook in terms of just adding that checklist in that little, on this page, whatever. But definitely I think most designers would want an outline of some sort. And then if need be, access to the course. And that may be something that halfway through the design process, they might say, okay, so I've gotten your outline, we've gone through this, but I feel like it's missing something, or you might feel like it's missing something, and you might decide, okay, I'm going to let you into the course real quick, look through, grab screenshots, whatever. That might help, because it is sometimes it can be hard to be I took what you gave me, but seeing the additional information might help just boost your workbook.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I love all of the ideas that you presented. And I think it's so important to consider having a workbook, because it's really something that does help the students. And it can even help you as you're going through the process of creating your course, in realizing that there's places where students may need a little bit more hand-holding or opportunity to break down their ideas in a workbook. It can even help you figure out spots where you want to go back and improve some things going forward. So I just want to thank you for all of this excellent information. Where can people go to find more information about you and the services you offer?
Yeah, so you can find me at justcreatives.com. And then I'm also all over social media at justcreatives.
Awesome.